"You can take your troops out of my country." Princess Alice didn't soften it. She didn't smile her way around it. A Nazi general had asked what he could do for her, and that was the answer Prince Philip's mother gave him. This was Athens during the war. The city was watched. Doors were watched. People were watched. And behind one of those doors, Alice was hiding members of a Jewish family who could have been taken away if the wrong person heard the wrong sound in the hallway. Soon, the Gestapo began asking questions. Alice had been deaf since childhood, and in that dangerous moment, she used her silence like protection. When they questioned her in German, she said she couldn't understand them. Think about that room for a second. A royal woman in plain clothes, a guarded city outside, a Jewish mother and daughter hidden inside, and men at the door who could destroy all of them. But Alice's courage didn't begin there. By that night in Athens, she'd already lost more than most people ever knew. Before we go further, if you believe royal history should be told with care, truth, and respect, not gossip, please like this video and subscribe to stay with us. Because Princess Alice's story isn't just royal history, it's a story of loss, faith, courage, and the quiet choices that saved lives. Hold that door in your mind for a moment. Not a palace gate, not a royal balcony, not one of those grand public entrances where people bow and cameras flash. Just a door in Athens, in a city where fear had learned to move quietly. By 1943, German control in Greece had hardened. Jewish families were being hunted more openly, more brutally, and every safe room had become a risk. Princess Alice was living there then, not as a queen, not as a ruling monarch, not as a woman protected by soldiers or power, but as an exiled princess in a hungry city. And behind her door, members of the Cohen family had been given shelter. That is the picture we need to keep before us. Alice standing between the street and the hidden rooms, between a hunted family and the people searching for them, between what was safe for herself and what was right for someone else. To understand why she opened that door, we have to understand what had already been taken from her, because that is the question at the heart of Princess Alice's life. When a woman has lost her home, her title's protection, her marriage, her years with her child, and even control over her own body, what remains inside her that can still protect someone else? We're not going to judge her from a distance. We're not going to dress up her pain and call it romance. And we're not going to turn her suffering into royal gossip. We're going to follow the evidence. We're going to see how a baby girl born at Windsor Castle became an exile. How her deafness, once treated as a difficulty, became part of her survival. What really happened to the Cohen family in Athens, and why Prince Philip later understood his mother's courage in a way the public never fully did. And the first answer begins with a baby girl born into royal comfort, who entered the world already learning how to live differently from everyone around her. This story comes from royal records, Holocaust memorial archives, medical history scholarship, and documented accounts of the Cohen family rescue. The royal family's own biography gives us the record of Prince Philip's early exile and childhood. The Royal Collection Trust gives us the family background of Prince Andrew, Princess Alice, and the Greek royal house she married into. The Tel Aviv University Wiener Library and Yad Vashem linked material give us the rescue story, the danger in Athens, and her later recognition as righteous among the nations. Medical history research gives us the painful record of what happened to her in 1930, and Holocaust Center North preserves the Cohen family story, the wartime setting, Alice's later years, and Prince Philip's own words about what his mother did. So this isn't a story built from whispers, it's built from records. And when those sources are placed together, they don't show an odd footnote in royal history. They show a woman almost erased by suffering. She was born Victoria Alice Elizabeth Julia Maria of Battenberg on February 25, 1885, at Windsor Castle. Queen Victoria was there at her birth. That detail matters, because from the first breath of her life, Alice belonged to the inner rooms of European royalty. She wasn't watching royal history from outside the window. She was born inside it. But there was something different about her. As a young child, Alice was diagnosed as deaf. Now, in a palace, that meant more than missing sound. A royal child was expected to respond to names, instructions, music, languages, manners, and tiny signals from adults who often said very little out loud. Palaces run on whispers, on doors opening softly, on servants crossing rooms without being noticed, on someone's title being announced before they enter, on one raised eyebrow at dinner meaning more than a whole speech. Alice had to learn the world another way. She learned faces, she learned mouths, she learned expressions. She learned how people carried tension before they admitted it. And because royal life crossed borders so often, she also learned to communicate across languages. English, German, French, and Greek became part of the way she moved through rooms where she could not rely on sound the way others did. That is where people often make the first mistake with Princess Alice. They hear that she was deaf, and they quietly place her in the category of weakness. But Alice's deafness did not make her smaller. It made her watchful. It made her alert to faces. It made her understand silence better than people who had never been forced to live inside it. And long before Athens, long before the Gestapo, long before the hidden family behind the door, Alice was already learning the skill that would one day matter more than any royal title she had. She was learning how to survive in a room where danger wasn't always spoken. The same condition that made childhood harder would one day help her survive a German interrogation. But first, she became a bride. In 1903, Alice married Prince Andrew of Greece and Denmark. From the outside, it looked like one of those great royal matches that tied Europe together with names, bloodlines, uniforms, and ceremonies. Prince Andrew was the fourth son of King George I of Greece. Alice came from the Battenberg family, with deep British and German royal connections. Their marriage joined her life to the Greek royal house, and in time they would have children, 4 daughters, and then their youngest child, their only son, Philip. The world would later know him as Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. But in those early years, he was simply Alice's little boy. And that is important, because before he became the husband of Queen Elizabeth, before the uniforms, before Buckingham Palace, before all the public duty, Philip belonged to a family that kept losing the ground beneath its feet. Greece was not a safe, settled royal stage. It was a country under political strain, with royal fortunes rising and falling, governments changing, wars leaving marks on every household. Alice had not married into calm. She had married into a house standing on moving ground. Still, she tried to live the role expected of her. There were children to raise, duties to perform, rooms to enter, names to remember, moves to make. But the old royal promise, the promise that birth and marriage could protect a woman from the worst of life, was already beginning to fail her. And when the collapse came, Philip was so small that his escape from Greece did not happen in a cradle fit for a prince. He was only 18 months old. In the early 1920s, Greece was in political crisis. Prince Andrew was court-martialed and imprisoned. He was later pardoned, but only on the condition that he leave Greece for good. The family had to get out. King George V ordered a Royal Navy ship to evacuate them from Corfu, and little Philip, the boy who would one day stand beside Britain's queen, was carried to safety in a cot made from an orange box. That image tells you more than a grand paragraph ever could. A royal baby leaving his birthplace in a fruit box. Not in comfort, not in ceremony, not with the calm protection people associate with palaces, in an orange box, because that was what the moment allowed. For Alice, exile wasn't a political word. It was packing children. It was leaving rooms before you were ready. It was watching adults speak in tight faces. It was knowing that a home could become unsafe without the walls changing at all. And because Alice was deaf, much of that fear may have reached her through what she saw before what she heard. The hurried gestures, the faces of servants, the silence after a door closed, the strain around her husband, the children needing to be kept calm while the adults understood how serious it was. Philip was too young to understand the meaning of banishment, but his body was carried through it. Alice understood. A mother always does. She knew that the life her son had been born into had already cracked before he could even speak for himself. That orange box became one of the first symbols of Philip's childhood. Not royal privilege, instability, movement, loss. A child taken from one country and carried toward another life. And for Alice, it was the beginning of a wound that would only deepen with time. Because exile was only the first loss. The next one would be quieter, more private, and far harder to explain to her young son. Paris in the 1920s had a softer surface than exile deserved. There were suitcases again, children growing taller, letters crossing borders, a mother trying to keep her face steady, while every adult around her knew that a royal title no longer guaranteed a settled home. Alice had been born at Windsor Castle, married into Greece, and carried her baby son out of danger. But now the family was living with the kind of uncertainty that doesn't always announce itself loudly. It sits at the breakfast table, it follows the children into the next room, it waits inside every unopened letter, and then, in 1930, Alice herself became the place where other people thought something had gone wrong. This is the part of Princess Alice's story that has often been handled badly. Too quickly, too coldly, sometimes almost like a royal curiosity, as if her suffering was just another strange detail attached to a famous family. But she wasn't a strange detail. She was a woman in distress, and she was placed inside the medical thinking of her time, inside a world where royal families often dealt with pain by moving it out of sight. In the winter of 1930, Princess Alice was admitted to Kurhaus Schloss Tegel. The medical record described a diagnosis of schizophrenic paranoia. Ernst Simmel was involved, and Sigmund Freud was consulted. Freud recommended high-intensity X-ray exposure to her ovaries. That sentence is hard to hear. It should be hard, because we're not talking about a rumor. We're talking about a woman whose inner suffering became something doctors, relatives, and institutions tried to manage with the tools and beliefs of that era. And whatever language the records use, the human truth is simpler. A mother was removed from the center of her own family. Philip was still a child. He had already lost the country where he was born. He had already been carried away from Greece in an orange box. He already knew, in the way children know things before they can explain them, that homes could disappear. And now his mother disappeared from daily life too. Not from the earth, not from memory, but from the ordinary places where a child expects a mother to be. At the table, at the door. In the room when something frightening happens, close enough to look at his face and know whether he was pretending to be brave. That is the wound here. Not a headline, not a label, not the ugly little phrase people sometimes use when they want to reduce a woman to her illness. The records describe a diagnosis and treatment. The human truth is that a mother disappeared from the center of her son's childhood, and Alice, who had already spent her life reading faces, now became the face other people studied. Doctors watched her words. Family decisions were made around her. Her religious intensity, her distress, her behavior, her body, all of it became part of a conversation in which she did not hold the power. There is a particular loneliness in that, a loneliness different from exile. In exile, you lose a country. In this, Alice lost the right to define what was happening to herself. And for Philip, the separation left a silence that no royal explanation could soften. Children don't understand medical files, they understand absence. They understand when the person who was supposed to stay near them is suddenly somewhere else. That is why this part must be told with care. Not to make Alice smaller, not to turn her pain into drama, but because without this chapter, we can't understand the woman who later stood inside a dangerous city and chose not to abandon another family. She knew what removal felt like. She knew what it meant for other people to decide your safety. She knew what it meant to have your life spoken about in rooms where you weren't the strongest voice. And when Alice returned to the world, she did not return as the same princess who had left it. Something in her life had shifted. The old royal shape no longer fit her the same way. The grandness, the ceremony, the polished rooms, the social expectations, they had all lost some of their hold. Alice had moved through a kind of suffering that stripped away the performance of importance. What remained was quieter, harder, more religious, more focused on service. She became less interested in appearing like a princess and more drawn to living as a woman of faith. Not in a soft, decorative way, in a practical way, in the kind of faith that reaches for bandages, food, shelter, and work. By 1939, she had returned to Greece and was living in a large townhouse in central Athens. Think about that for a moment. After everything that had happened, exile, separation, treatment, years of being handled by others, Alice went back to a country that had already cost her so much. She could have searched for comfort. She could have tried to live quietly under someone else's roof. She could have hidden inside what remained of royal protection. Instead, she moved closer to need. That doesn't mean her life became simple. It didn't. Faith did not erase the wounds. Service did not give back the missing years with Philip. A plain dress did not undo what had been done to her in clinics and family decisions. But it gave her a different way to stand in the world. She had lost many of the usual protections of royalty, but she had gained a different relationship to suffering. She knew what it meant to be watched. She knew what it meant to be powerless. She knew what it meant to be separated from the people she loved. And that knowledge changed the way she saw fear in other people. Some people come through pain and grow hard around it. Alice came through pain and seemed to recognize it faster. By the time Europe moved toward war again, she wasn't the young bride of 1903 anymore. She wasn't only Prince Philip's mother. She wasn't only the deaf princess from Windsor. She had become a woman who had lived through private collapse and still chose to face public danger. So when fear came knocking at someone else's door, Alice recognized it before the world asked her to. Athens under occupation was not the Athens of royal visits and family connections. By 1941, Greece was occupied by Axis forces. The city changed. Food became harder to find. Movement became dangerous. Curfews pressed people indoors. Flags and uniforms altered the feeling of familiar streets. A person learned to lower their voice, to notice footsteps, to think before saying a name too clearly. Under occupation, ordinary life doesn't vanish all at once. It becomes smaller. A shop still opens, but with less on the shelves. A mother still cooks, but with less in the pot. A letter still arrives, but now it can frighten the hand that opens it. Alice stayed in Athens. That matters. Many royals spent war years away from the worst danger. Alice remained in the city, and her position was painfully complicated. Her son Philip was serving in the British Royal Navy. Some of her daughters had married into German families. Around her, the war was not only political. It ran through family lines, loyalties, and old European royal connections. But in Athens, hunger was not theoretical. People needed food. Children needed shelter. The sick needed nursing. Refugees needed help from anyone still willing to help. Alice worked in relief and aid settings. She helped where she could. She searched for food during curfew hours. She moved through a city where doing the decent thing could also make you visible to the wrong eyes. And visibility was dangerous, especially after 1943. After Mussolini's fall, German control tightened, and anti-Jewish policy in Greece hardened. For Jewish families in Athens, the question was no longer only how to survive war, it was who could be trusted with the truth of their existence. That is a terrible question. Who can know where you sleep? Who can hear your child move? Who can be trusted not to trade your name for safety? Every door became a possible betrayal. Every neighbor became a risk. Every knock carried meaning. And Alice, living in that large Athens house, was no longer just a witness to suffering. She was standing close enough to become part of someone else's survival. And then one family's danger became personal. His name was Hymaki Cohen. He had been a Jewish former member of the Greek parliament, and he was connected to the Greek royal family. Those connections mattered because they formed the thread that would later bring his widow into Alice's care. But by the time the danger reached its worst, Hymaki was gone. His widow, Rachel, was the one left trying to protect the family. That is where this story changes shape. Because it's one thing to say that Princess Alice helped Jewish refugees. That phrase is true, but it can become too smooth if we're not careful. It can hide the human reality. Rachel was a mother. It becomes the line between being seen and staying alive. Behind that door, Rachel and her family had to live with the discipline of hiding. No careless noise, no easy movement, no normal life. The walls may have given shelter, but they also held fear inside them. For Alice, the risk was not small. She was not hiding a piece of paper. She was hiding people, breathing people, a mother and children whose presence could not be explained away if the wrong men looked in the wrong place. And here is where the title becomes real. Princess Alice had lost so much already. She had lost the stable world she was born into. She had lost Greece once through exile. She had lost years of motherhood with Philip. She had lost control in the hands of doctors and family decisions. She had lost the easy comfort people assume comes with a royal name. But she still had a home. She still had a door that could close. And when Rachel Cohen needed protection, Alice used what remained. That is not a small thing. It is easy to admire courage when it looks clean from a distance. It's harder to sit with what courage means day after day. It means waking up and remembering that the secret is still there. It means hearing movement in the street and wondering if this is the hour everything breaks. It means knowing that kindness has tied your fate to someone else's danger. The Cohens remained hidden there until Greece's liberation in October 1944. But those words passed too quickly. Until liberation, that means waiting. That means fear stretching across months. That means Alice did not make one brave choice and then return to ordinary life. She had to keep choosing. She had to keep the door closed. She had to keep the secret alive. Because hiding a family was not one brave decision. It was a decision that had to be remade every day the Germans remained in Athens. A hallway, a stair, a closed room, a woman listening without hearing the way others heard. Outside the house, Athens had learned the sound of occupation, boots on stone, sharp knocks, low voices, doors opening when people wished they could stay closed. Inside, Alice had to read danger through faces, movement, and silence. One wrong answer could expose everyone. One careless moment could bring the whole house down. Then came the questions. The answer she gave the German general had not been safe. "You can take your troops out of my country." There was no softness in it, no royal politeness wrapped around the truth. A German officer had asked Princess Alice what he could do for her, and she had answered as if power did not frighten her. But power does not like being spoken to that way. After that, Gestapo officers watched her. They questioned her. They wanted to know what she was doing. They wanted to know what she understood. They wanted to know whether this elderly royal woman in Athens was harmless, foolish, protected by her name, or hiding something more dangerous than any of them could afford to miss. And this is where Alice's story turns in a way no novelist would need to invent. The deafness that had shaped her childhood became part of how she survived. As a little girl, she had been forced to study the world differently. She could not depend on sound the way other children did. She had learned to read lips. She had learned to watch expressions. She had learned how people reveal themselves before they speak. Now, in occupied Athens, those same habits mattered. When officers questioned her in German, Alice said she did not understand them. On the surface, that may sound simple. It wasn't. She was not just avoiding a conversation, she was protecting a secret inside a house under watch. She was taking the thing the world had once treated as a limitation and turning it into a shield. Not loudly, not theatrically, just carefully. There is a certain kind of courage that looks almost still from the outside. It does not shout, it does not raise a flag. It sits in a room, keeps its face calm, and lets danger pass close enough to touch the furniture. That was Alice's courage here. She was not a helpless, elderly royal woman being carried by history. She was using what remained to her: her name, her age, her reputation, her deafness, her ability to stay composed when a wrong reaction could cost lives. And behind the calm face, the risk was alive every second. Because if the officers had pushed further, if they had searched harder, if one person had betrayed one detail, the Cohen family could have been found. Rachel and her children were not hidden inside a story. They were hidden inside a real house, in a real city, under real occupation. Alice knew that. She knew the difference between privacy and danger. She had lived enough years inside royal households to understand what doors meant. Some doors kept ceremony in. Some kept strangers out. But this door in Athens was different. It held human lives behind it. That is why this moment is so much more powerful than a simple story of a clever reply. It was not only that Alice had the nerve to answer a German general, it was that after answering him, she still had to keep living under German eyes. She still had to move through the house, still had to protect the people inside it, still had to make herself believable, still had to remain, in their minds, just difficult enough to be dismissed, and just royal enough to be handled carefully. That balance could not be taught in any palace school. It came from a lifetime of watching rooms, reading faces, and surviving situations where other people had more power than she did. When she said she could not understand their German, she was doing more than refusing a question. She was buying time. And in that house, time was life. But danger did not end when the officers left. Occupation did not pause politely at the doorstep. Athens was hungry. By the final week before liberation, Alice later wrote to Philip that she had eaten nothing but bread and butter. There had been no meat for months. That one detail strips away any comfortable version of this story. Bread and butter. Not banquet tables, not silver dishes, not the soft protection people still attached to royal blood. Bread and butter, In a city where hunger had become part of the air, Alice did not save lives from a place of ease. She stayed inside the suffering with everyone else. She did not simply hide people, she stayed. She endured hunger, she carried risk in her body, and when fighting broke out in the streets, she did not hide herself away behind palace habits or family connections. She walked through danger to hand out rations, alarming British forces who understood very clearly that the streets were not safe. There is something almost impossible to separate in Alice by this point: faith, stubbornness, duty, and plain human nerve. When she was warned about the danger of being shot, she gave one of those dry answers that feels completely her own. She said she would not hear the shots anyway. It sounds almost darkly funny for a second, then it lands differently. Because this was not a woman making light of war from a distance. This was a deaf woman moving through danger in a starving city, using the one fact that had followed her since childhood as if it were no reason to turn back. She had spent her life being measured by what she lacked. Now she was measuring danger by what needed to be done. That is a very different kind of royal courage. Not the courage of uniforms, not the courage of speeches. The courage of going out when staying inside would be easier. The courage of carrying food when your own body is hungry. The courage of helping refugees when helping them might bring suspicion to your own door. Even after liberation, conditions did not suddenly become gentle. War leaves damage behind it. Streets may clear before lives do. People still need food, shelter, medicine, clothing, and someone willing to notice them after the headlines have moved on. Alice continued voluntary work with refugees. She searched for food during curfew hours. She kept moving toward need, even when the danger had changed shape. That is one of the great hidden truths of her life. For some people, survival becomes the end of the story. For Alice, survival became a responsibility. When liberation finally came, Alice did not step back into comfort. She stepped deeper into service. After the war, Alice's life became even plainer. And in a royal story, plainness can be more revealing than splendor. Because earlier in her life, jewels had meant something very different. They belonged to the world of weddings, portraits, family rank, ceremonies, and rooms where people knew exactly who stood above whom. Jewels were part of the old language of royalty. Alice changed the meaning. She sold part of her jewelry to help establish a religious ministry and an orphanage in Athens. That matters. A jewel that once marked status became something closer to bread, shelter, nursing, care, a bed for a child who needed one, a hand for someone sick. She was not only giving away money, she was turning the symbols of her old life into service. In January 1949, she founded the Christian Sisterhood of Martha and Mary, a Greek Orthodox nursing order. It was not a decorative religious project, meant to make a princess look humble in photographs. Alice wanted active service. She wanted care for the sick and the poor. She wanted faith to have hands. That phrase fits her by then, faith with hands. After all she had lived through, Alice did not seem interested in a faith that stayed safely inside private feeling. Hers had to move. It had to bandage, it had to feed, it had to open doors. And when she appeared at royal events later, people noticed the contrast. At Philip and Elizabeth's 1947 wedding, she was present as the groom's mother, but she did not fit easily into the polished picture people expected. By the time of Elizabeth's coronation in 1953, Alice appeared in a simple gray dress and wimple, in the style of a nun's habit. Think about that image inside Westminster Abbey. Crowns, robes, velvet, gold. And there was Alice, plain and severe, carrying a life that no decoration could explain. To some people, she looked odd. To some, perhaps uncomfortable. A princess who dressed like a nun did not match the public's idea of what royal motherhood was supposed to look like. People wanted smooth stories. Alice was not smooth. She had been exiled, separated, confined, hungry, watched, questioned, and remade by faith. She was not a soft-focused royal mother waiting in the background. She was a survivor who had become almost impossible to categorize. That may be why her story was so often reduced. It was easier to call her unusual than to sit with the full weight of what she had lived through. But the jewels tell the truth more honestly than the labels do. She took what was left of royal value and gave it to people who needed help. The world saw a strange royal woman, dressed like a nun, But Prince Philip had seen something much harder to explain. By the late 1960s, Alice was elderly and frail. The years had taken their toll. Her hearing had long been limited. Her body was weaker. Greece, the country that had shaped so much of her adult life, was again in turmoil after the military coup of 1967. That year, she left Greece for the last time and moved to Buckingham Palace, where she lived until her death in 1969. There is something deeply moving about that final return to royal walls. She had been born at Windsor Castle in the presence of Queen Victoria. She had crossed Europe through marriage, exile, illness, war, and service. She had hidden a Jewish family in Athens. She had sold jewels for ministry work. She had walked through hunger with food for others. And near the end, she came back inside the British royal world. But she did not come back as the young girl from Windsor. She did not come back as the bride of 1903. She did not come back as the mother who once carried children through exile. She came back plain-dressed, aging, deeply religious, and shaped by losses no palace could polish away. Buckingham Palace could give her rooms. It could not give back the years. It could not restore the everyday motherhood Philip had lost as a boy. It could not undo the medical control of 1930. It could not return Greece as it had been before banishment, occupation, and hunger. It could not make her life easy to explain. And perhaps Philip understood that better than most. His own life had moved toward duty, ceremony, naval discipline, and the hard demands of being beside a future queen. Alice's life had moved toward faith, poverty, nursing, and service. Mother and son were connected by blood, but they had been shaped by different wounds. Philip had learned early not to expect softness from life. Alice had learned that suffering could either close a person inward or open them toward others. Neither of them became sentimental in the easy way. That may be why her courage did not need grand language from him later. He knew she had not been acting for praise. He knew she had not been building a public memory of herself. She had simply seen people in danger and done what she believed a human being should do. That is the part of Alice that becomes clearer near the end of her life. She had been misunderstood in almost every chapter. As a deaf child, she had been seen through what she lacked. As a royal exile, she had been seen through what her family lost. As a patient, she had been seen through a diagnosis. As a religious woman, she had been seen through oddness. As Philip's mother, she had often been pushed to the edge of his public story. But behind all those outside descriptions, one fact remained. When people needed saving, Alice opened the door. Only after her death would the world begin to understand what she had done behind that Athens door. Go back once more to that door in Athens. Not the palace gates, not the balcony, not the public photographs. Just a door that stayed closed long enough for a mother and her children to live. Behind it was fear. Outside it was danger. And standing between the two was a woman history had nearly misunderstood. And years later, at Yad Vashem, Philip would give the simplest explanation for why she had done it. On March 11, 1993, Princess Alice was recognized by Yad Vashem as righteous among the nations. That title is not handed out for royal background. It's not given because someone had a famous son. It's not a decoration for kindness from a safe distance. It's given for moral courage in the face of danger, for helping Jews during the Holocaust when help itself could bring punishment, for choosing another person's life when silence would have been safer, and for Princess Alice, that recognition came long after she was gone. She had died in 1969. She never stood there to hear the words said about her. She never watched the ceremony. She never gave a speech explaining herself. She never had to sit beneath the weight of public praise. Maybe that's fitting, because Alice's courage had never been built for applause. In 1994, Prince Philip went to Yad Vashem with Princess George of Hanover, Alice's daughter, and they planted a tree in her honor. That image is worth holding quietly. Philip, the little boy once carried out of Greece in an orange box, now standing in Jerusalem for the mother whose life had been so hard to explain. The son who had grown up through absence, the son who had learned duty early, the son who rarely spoke in soft public language, and there he was, acknowledging that his mother had saved lives when the cost of doing so could have been terrible. Philip's words about her are some of the most important words in this whole story. He said he suspected his mother never thought her actions were special. With her deep religious faith, he believed she saw it as a natural human reaction to people in distress. That sentence tells us almost everything. Alice didn't hide the Cohen family because she wanted history to call her brave. She didn't do it because she knew a memorial would one day speak her name. She didn't do it because she expected her son to stand beneath a tree in Jerusalem decades later and explain her heart to the world. She did it because Rachel Cohen and her children were in danger, and Alice had a door. That was enough. A door, a room, a name that still carried some protection, a silence she knew how to use, a faith that told her suffering was not something to observe politely from the other side of the street. This is where the whole shape of her life changes. The deaf child from Windsor, the young bride in Greece, the mother in exile, the patient whose life was taken out of her own hands, the woman in Athens under occupation, the plain-dressed figure at royal ceremonies. All of those versions of Alice meet at that door, because what she had lost did not make her empty. It made her able to recognize loss in someone else before it was too late. And there is something deeply moving about Philip being the one to say that she likely never saw it as special. A son who had lost so much of ordinary childhood with his mother became the witness who helped the world understand her. Not as a strange royal woman, not as a footnote, not as a shadow beside bigger names, but as a woman who knew distress when she saw it, and answered it with shelter. That is the emotional truth at the center of her recognition. Alice did not save the Cohen family because she wanted history to praise her. She saved them because they were in danger and she had a door. But even her burial would take years to complete the circle. Princess Alice died at Buckingham Palace in 1969. Those words sound almost simple after such a life. Buckingham Palace, the place people associate with ceremony, order, balcony appearances, polished floors, and a monarchy that always seems to know how to stand still in public. But Alice had never been a still life. She had crossed countries, languages, illnesses, wars, and losses. She had lived inside royal rooms and hungry streets. She had known Windsor as a baby, Greece as a bride, exile as a mother, medical control as a patient, Athens as a servant of others, and Buckingham Palace as an old woman at the end. Her final wish carried her somewhere else. She had asked to be buried on the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem, beside her aunt. That wish was not fulfilled immediately. Years passed. Then, in 1988, her remains were transferred there. There is a quiet meaning in that. A woman born at Windsor Castle, in the presence of Queen Victoria, did not finally rest in the royal landscape where her life began. She rested in Jerusalem, close to the sacred geography of the faith that had shaped her last decades, and close to the memory of the people whose survival gave her story its deepest weight. Her life had moved through grand places, but its meaning was never grand in the usual royal sense. It wasn't about crowns. It wasn't about rank. It wasn't about who stood nearest the throne. It was about what remained when those things failed to protect her. The world had called her many things: princess, exile, patient, mother, nun-like figure, royal eccentric. But none of those words fully reached the truth. The truth was quieter. When the world became dangerous, Alice still knew how to protect. When others closed their eyes, she opened her home. When she had little left that looked powerful, she used what she had. And perhaps that is why her grave in Jerusalem feels like more than a burial place. It feels like the final answer to a life that began in a palace and ended in service. The woman who was born at Windsor Castle rests in Jerusalem because the deepest part of her story was never about royal comfort. So let's not leave her only in death, let's leave her alive. Leave her in Athens, plain-dressed, moving through a city that had been stripped of ease. The streets are tense, food is short. People are tired in a way that sleep can't fix. Alice is no longer the young royal bride with the polished future. She is older now. Her body is weaker. Her hearing has shaped every hour of her life. Her face carries years that didn't spare her. But she is still moving. Maybe she is carrying food. Maybe she is going towards someone who needs help. Maybe she is stepping into a street where other people have already decided it's safer not to go. There is no crown in this image. No official portrait. No applause, no one telling her she will one day be honored. Just a woman who has learned, the hard way, that suffering is never abstract when it's standing in front of you. That is the Princess Alice worth remembering. Not because she was flawless, not because her life was easy to understand, but because after losing nearly every worldly thing people associate with royalty, she kept the one thing that mattered most in the end, the instinct to protect life. The door in Athens is no longer just a door. It is the proof that a woman can be stripped of status and still keep moral courage. It is the proof that silence can protect, that faith can become action, that a mother who lost years with her own child could still understand the terror of another mother trying to save hers. Alice had been born into one of the most privileged circles in Europe, yet her greatest act came when privilege had already failed her. And maybe that is why her story still hurts in such a quiet way. Because she did not save lives after being spared from suffering. She saved lives after suffering had already found her. If this story helped you see Princess Alice not as a footnote, but as a woman of courage, you're welcome to stay with us. Please like this video so more people can find her story, and subscribe if you want royal history told with care, not gossip. Because stories like this deserve to be remembered properly, not loudly, not cheaply, but with the respect owed to people who lived through more than the photographs ever showed. In the next story, we'll follow the hidden wounds of Prince Philip's childhood, the exile, the school years, the family losses, and how those early years shaped the man Queen Elizabeth later depended on. Because sometimes the people history calls difficult were first children who had to learn how to survive.